Before we start, I just want to give a warning because this video will contain graphic human torture such as breaking of human bones, murder, starvation, RAPE, and adult dialogue. Viewer discretion is greatly advised. We're talking about the case of Junko Furuta. Junko was born January 18th, 1971 in Misato, Japan. She grew up with her mom and dad, an older brother, and a younger brother. She attended Yashiho Manami High School. She had dreams of becoming a K-pop star. She was one of the popular girls in school, and people described her as a lively person and someone who studied hard. She focused a lot on school. She wasn't the type to go out and party a lot like the other high school students. She would stay in and study. She had really good grades in school, and even though she was only 17 years old, she was very mature and responsible for her age. Her friends called her the mom and mother figure of the group. She was always making sure if her friends were okay and if they had everything they needed. She had a part-time job at a plastic molding factory. She saved the money from this job for a graduation trip she planned for herself. And even after high school, she already had a good job lined up at an electronics retailer. Junko had a bright future with a lot to look forward to. Unfortunately, she caught the eye of 18-year-old Hiroshi Miyano. He attended the same high school as Junko for a while until he dropped out. Hiroshi was a high school dropout and was always in trouble. He had anger issues from a very young age, so his parents put him in Juno throughout middle school and high school to release all the anger he had, but that only made things worse. Instead of helping him with his anger like they had hoped, it taught him how to sort out all of his problems with violence. He would even kick and hit his own mother. He would get his money by robbing people on the street. Then he joined the Yakuza gang. In this gang, there's levels of severity, and Hiroshi was all the way at the bottom, which is called Shinpira, which consisted of mostly theft and sexual assault. It's unclear, but people think Hiroshi targeted Junko because when he asked her out on a date, she said no. Another theory is she was just at the wrong place at the wrong time, but it's said that Hiroshi said himself he targeted her because she was pretty. In this Yakuza gang, Hiroshi had 3 close friends. 16-year-old Shinji Minato. He also went by Nobuharu, but everyone just called him Shinji. 17-year-old Joe Ogura and Yasushi Watanabe. All 3 of them were at the bottom of the gang, just like Hiroshi. And just a few weeks before the case I'm about to tell you about, the 4 of them R-worded a girl but let her go. She was too afraid to tell the police because she knew they were in the Yakuza gang, and she didn't want them coming after her or her family. On November 25th, 1988, around 6:30 p.m., Junko was riding her bike home from work. As she's riding her bike, Shinji comes out of nowhere and pushes her off her bike, but then runs away. But get this, Hiroshi was standing across the street because this was all a plan and a setup that the 2 premeditated. He runs over to Junko and he asked her if she was okay. Then he offers to walk her home. And since Junko recognized him from school, she let him walk her home. As they're walking, due to all the talking, she gets distracted. And that's when she notices Hiroshi had taken her to an abandoned warehouse. Once they're inside, Hiroshi tells her if she doesn't do exactly what he tells her to do, then he'll report her to the rest of the Yakuza gang. And someone will come unalive her and her family. So because of that, she listens to everything he says. She goes with him inside of the abandoned warehouse, and that's where Hiroshi R-words Junko. Afterwards, he takes her to a motel where she is R-worded 2 more times. The next day, on November 26th, Hiroshi calls his 3 friends, Shinji, Joe, and Yasushi, to brag about what he did. Then around 3 a.m. that same night, he meets up with them at a park with Junko. Hiroshi brought Junko's things with him when they went to the park, and through her things is how he was able to find her address. Hiroshi told Junko if she doesn't abide by what they say, they'll go to her house and unalive her family. After the park, they take her to Shinji's house. He lives with his parents, and his parents knew he was in a gang, but was too afraid to ask him anything about it because they didn't want to know what horrible things he's been doing. They didn't want to deal with it or know anything if someone were to ask them. Throw the whole parents away. But before taking Junko into Shinji's house, they came up with a plan to say Junko was one of their girlfriends. But when they brought her into the house, the parents never even asked who she was. The 4 boys just took Junko upstairs to Shinji's room. They didn't even have to lie. How are you a parent and not asking who you bringing in the house? You see 4 boys and 1 girl going upstairs and you don't have any questions? Any? But inside Shinji's room is where Junko would spend the next 44 days being tortured and held captive. The next day, November 27th, Junko's parents are now worried at this point because she never came home from work. They called the police and filed a missing persons report. They made flyers and the police organized searches for Junko, and they were looking for witnesses. When the 4 boys realized people were looking for her, they made her call her parents and tell them she was okay and that she ran away from home and is now staying with a friend, and to call the whole search off. And if she didn't do that, they told her that they'll come for her family. If I called my mom and told her something like this, she would know I was lying and that something was up, and she would not call off this search. I'm just wondering if Junko's parents ever thought that this seemed suspicious of Junko, like if this was something they think that she would do. I'm just wondering, She had her future planned out. She already had a good job waiting for her after high school. She was a hard worker. I'm just wondering if they thought this was weird and out of the blue. But I couldn't find anything to figure that out. So, because Junko made that call to her parents did call off the search. And because of that, Junko spent the next month and a half inside of Shinji's house. While she was inside, she was starved and beaten multiple times a day. She was naked the whole time because they never gave her any clothes. Sometimes she was made to sleep on the balcony in the freezing cold. She was burned with cigarettes, forced to dance naked in front of them, and they inserted many objects inside of her like scissors, bottles, light bulbs, and etc. They would tie her wrist to the ceiling and would use her as a punching bag. They tore off her left nipple with pliers, forced her to drink her own urine, eat her own feces, and eat live cockroaches. They poured lighter fluid on her and lit her on fire. She had 3rd-degree burns all over her body. They would light fireworks inside of her ears, genitals, and mouth. She had heavy weights dropped on parts of her body, including her fingers, stomach, and legs, which led to them breaking. They beat her so badly she couldn't even breathe out of her nose. Junko would beg them to just unalive her, but they would always refuse. It was more fun for them to torture her. She suffered through all of this while Shinji's parents knew she was upstairs, and they never asked any questions. The 4 boys decided to invite their friends, who's in the gang too, to come over and R-word Junko. At one point, she was abused by 12 different men in one day. When these men came over, they never did or said anything. They thought it was fine. They just joined in and was abusing her too. But one day, one gang member by the name of Koichi said as soon as he saw Junko, he became sick to his stomach. He was the only one who knew and felt that this wasn't okay, but still, even knowing that this wasn't right, he still R-worded Junko because his friends did it. He said he he wasn't able to look at her while he was doing it, but that he did not stop because he was afraid his friends would unalive him for being weak. He's just as bad. He knows that this is wrong, but he still did it anyway because he's afraid of his so-called friends. When Koichi gets home, he can't stop thinking about Junko, so he ends up telling his brother about Junko, and it was his brother who told their parents. Their parents immediately call the police, and they tell them about Junko being held captive in Shinji's house. The police go over to Shinji's house, and his parents answer the door. The police questions the parents about a girl being in there, and the parents lie and say no one was there. They tell the police, you can come inside and look if you want to. And the police took that as, okay, they're inviting us inside the house. That means they can't be hiding anything. So we're just going to go ahead and go. So because of that, they never even looked inside of the house. Throw them in the trash at the dump yard. In early December of 1988, Junko was able to get access to a phone and call the police. But before she was even able to say anything to them, one of the boys snatched the phone away from her, and as punishment for trying to call the police, the boys poured lighter fluid all over her legs and set her on fire. Junko's body was so crippled that it took her almost an hour to go to the bathroom, up until she lost all control of her bowel movements completely. And when that would happen, the boys would punish her for it. Due to her body's condition, she would vomit often. Anything she would try to eat, her body would reject it. When she would vomit, she was punished for that as well. Junko's body and face became completely unrecognizable. During an autopsy, they discovered that Junko's brain decreased due to dehydration. She most likely, towards the end of her captivity, wasn't always conscious. She was slowly decaying and started to smell. When she started to smell due to the decay, the boys lost interest. So they went out to find another girl to replace her. The girl that they found, they worded her, but let her go immediately. And I wonder, why was that? Why not keep her, but keep Junko? Earlier, I mentioned a few weeks before Junko, they worded a girl and they let her go too. So why are they letting these girls go, but not Junko? January 4th, 1989, the boys went out to play mahjong. And when they lost, they went to Shinji's house to take their frustration out on Junko. They beat her, whipped her, put candle wax on her eyelids, and beat her until she bled. And so that they wouldn't get blood on themselves, they taped plastic bags around their hands and continued to beat her. This lasted for 2 hours until Junko passes away. The boys just think she passed out until the next morning when Shinji's brother found her dead inside of Shinji's room. He tells the 4 boys she's dead and not passed out, and that's when they begin to panic. They wrap her body in several blankets, put her body in a travel bag, and put that travel bag in a 55-gallon drum. They filled the drum with wet concrete and disposed of it in a concrete truck. January 23rd, 1989, Hiroshi and Joe were arrested and questioned for the rape of a 19-year-old girl. The same girl I mentioned after Junko started to decay and when they wanted to replace her. They threatened her, but she went to the police anyway and filed a report. During their interrogation, there was also an unsolved double homicide in the town about a pregnant woman and her child. The police assumed the 2 boys were involved in this double homicide, so they asked them questions about a murder but didn't specify exactly which murder. Joe and Hiroshi thought the police was asking them about Junko's murder. Hiroshi assumed Joe confessed to what they did to Junko, So Hiroshi confesses. He tells them exactly where Junko's body was. The police is surprised because they weren't even talking about Junko, and from what they knew, Junko ran away and was staying with a friend. They find Junko's body in a concrete drum, but was unable to identify her because her whole body was unrecognizable. But they were eventually able to identify her by her fingerprints. Some of Junko's hair was sticking out of the concrete drum. But that same day, Hiroshi, Shinji, Yasushi, and Joe were arrested for Junko's murder. The 4 boys pled guilty to committing bodily injury that resulted in death. In July of 1990, they all went to trial. Junko's family was at the trial, and it said her mother had a mental breakdown during the trial after hearing all the terrible, horrendous details the boys did to her daughter. Hiroshi, the ringleader of this whole thing, he's the one who came up with the plan. He's the one who kidnapped Junko and the one who wanted to keep her. He only got 17 years in prison. Only 17. Why not life? And here is where it really gets wild. Hiroshi later went to court and argued that his sentence was too long. He appealed it and tried for a lesser sentence. During court, he showed no remorse. So the jury said, no, you got to stay in jail. And as a matter of fact, you're getting 3 more years added on. So his sentence increased by 3 more years. So now he was only serving 20 years. The court orders Hiroshi's family to pay compensation for Junko's family. So Hiroshi's family sold their house for $425,000 and gave all that money to Junko's family. Now for Shinji's sentencing. He's the one who kept Junko in his house and helped kidnap her. He only received 4 to 6 years in prison, but he thought his sentence was too long too, so he appealed his sentence. The court said no, and he got a little more time added on, and he ended up serving 5 to 9 years now. His family was ordered to pay $370,000 in compensation. Joe was sentenced to only 8 years in prison. His inmates said he would brag about what he did to Junko and brag about being in the news, and he would say he's going to make history for what he did to Junko. There's literally no words. Then we have Yasushi, who ended up serving 5 to 7 years, and it said he's out there somewhere living a private life. They're all just out there. They're all just out here living their normal lives after what they did to Junko. And it was said that the news didn't want to release their names because they were minors, but one news source said, no, that's ridiculous. Nobody cares that they're minors. This was horrendous. The people need to know what they did, so they released these boys' names like they should have been released in the first place. There were several other men who participated in abusing and R-wording Junko, and some of them were identified and sentenced, like Tetsuo Nakamura and Kiyoshi Ihara, who was charged with RAPE after their DNA was found on and inside Junko's body. The community thought the sentencing wasn't enough, and they thought it was an insult to the family, which it was. They protested and tried to take it to court, but the court did not budge at all. On April 2nd, 1999, there was a funeral held for Junko. One of her friends at the funeral said, "Junchan," which was her nickname, "Junchan, welcome back. I would have never imagined that we would see you again on this day. You must have been in so much pain, so much suffering. The happy we all made for the school festival looks really good on you. We will never forget you. I have heard that the principal has presented you with a graduation certificate, so we graduated together. Junchan, there is no more pain, no more suffering. Please rest in peace. The principal gave her parents her high school diploma, and they had a moment of silence for Junko. Junko's job at the electronics retailer that I was talking about earlier gave Junko's family the uniform she would have worn with her name on it. They placed it in her casket at her funeral. Hiroshi applied for parole in 2004 and was denied, but was released in 2009 after only serving 18 years in prison. He was released at 36 years old. He changed his name to Hiroshi Yokohama. In 2013, he was arrested for fraud, but due to insufficient evidence, he was released. Shinji was released in 1997 at 22 years old and changed his name to Nobu Haru. And somehow his parents were not charged with being accomplices, but they did have to pay compensation, like I mentioned before. He was later arrested in 2018 for attempted murder and beating of a 32-year-old man with a metal rod and slashing his throat with a knife. He has since been released. Yasushi was released in 1998 at 24 years old and has since been living a quiet life, like I mentioned before. Joe was released in 1999 at 25 years old. He changed his name to Joe Kamisuko after he was adopted by a supporter of his. In 2004, he was arrested for assault of a man he thought his girlfriend cheated on him with. He tracked him down, beat him, and threw him in the back seat of his truck, drove him to a bar his mother owned, and continued to beat him for the next 4 hours, saying, "I'm going to kill you. I've done it before and got away with it." He was sentenced to 4 years in prison and released in 2011 for that crime. But get this, because I just cannot. They all crazy. Joe's mother went to Junko's grave and vandalized it often, saying that Junko ruined her young boy's life. What in the psycho? They're all released and out here living whatever lives they want to live after they all took Junko's life. She doesn't get to live her dreams and live out the things that she had planned for herself. They took that from her. They took her from her family and friends. May she rest in peace. Let me know what you thought about this case down in the comments so we can talk about it. And if you haven't already and want to see more videos like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in my next one.